To be here. I have the chance to introduce my friend and colleague, Curt Carlson. And before I say a little bit about Curt, I wanted to give you 3 facts and 3 themes for our discussion today on innovation from the middle. First, fact, most innovations come from the middle. Little understood the fact that when the firm studied more than 50 innovations in their book, What's the Big Idea? Larry Prusak and Tom Davenport found that, to their surprise, most of the innovations originated in the middle of the organization. The second surprising fact, at least surprising to some, and it explains the first fact, is that CEOs are just so incredibly busy. They may be too busy to spend time on innovation. A study by Michael Porter and Noria in Harvard Business Review showed that they only spend 3% of their time on customers and 0% of their time specifically on innovation. So it's perhaps not surprising that they are not originating innovations. And thirdly, when you come to think about it, when middle managers come to think about it, and you ask them, do you need more money or more authority to get on with innovation? We conducted a survey in a workshop we did this week, and we found that an astonishing 97% of middle managers told us that they did not perceive they needed more money or more permission. They had authority and money to get on with it. So those interesting facts suggest that this topic is perhaps more important than it's usually considered. But to make it happen, I'm suggesting that we talk, at least include 3 themes. One is the need to actually make a decision to be a leader in value creation and innovation. I spent much of my career doing various innovative things, but it wasn't the centerpiece. It was only once I decided I am going to make innovation happen that suddenly the whole scene changed, and I actually started to make some difference. Secondly, you need to have some skills to understand and propose sensible innovations that have a good chance to have success. And Curt will be talking about what that involves. How do you actually create a value in an organization? And thirdly, what I hadn't understood for most of my career, you need to be good at communication. You need to be able to communicate powerfully the idea. No matter how good it is, you're wasting your breath if people are not listening. So discovering how leaders can use the power of storytelling, for instance, to connect with their audience and make them see that this is something worth looking at, is kind of central. So those 3 themes, I'm hoping will shed light on in the course of the talk. And we have here the world's expert on this subject. Before he became a CEO, he was a serial innovator at RCA and elsewhere, and I hope he talks a lot about that part of his career. When he became a CEO, he became of SRI International, it became a serial innovator, and he enabled some billion-dollar innovations to happen, including the well-known Siri. And since when he retired from that CEO position, he's gone on sparking innovation all around the world. Most of what I know about this subject I've learned from Curt, and so I'm really happy that he's here today to tell us about this very interesting and really little-known subject of innovation from the middle.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with you and your team here discussing this really important topic. And I hope everybody can see my slides. And when we're done, Steve and I will have a discussion and get your question about what else you want to know and how we can help. So operating from the middle, actions you can take to be more successful. As Steve said, that's the goal here. How can we be successful? So I'm gonna give a quick overview of the innovation challenge, then some basic value creation concepts so we can think kind of specifically about things you can, and then things you can take from that that you can apply starting today, as Steve just suggested. And also, we're going to talk about some tips that are mistakes that can get in the way. So both the positive side and some things you probably don't want to do. As Steve said, when I went to SRI, it had been failing for 20 years. It was basically bankrupt. The buildings were falling down. They were selling off the land. And basically, everybody was angry at everybody else because that's what happens when you're failing. And the ideas that we're going to talk about, and we did high definition television. My teams won 2 Emmys. That added $50 billion to Apple. We made a lot of money, but they made more money. Nuance, the leading speech company that just sold for $20 billion. Intuitive Surgical, that's an $80 billion company. And in the process, we grew SRI 3.5 times. And if you want more information, I've written a book about this, a Harvard Business Review article, and we have a website you can find more information. But the point here is these ideas all came from the middle, as Steve just said. And without permission from my senior management, they basically said they weren't going to support actually my marketing guy. And we just went off and we learned. And so that's what we're going to share. Steve and I will go into more detail about that of this. And you know, when you think about your results, whether you're an individual, a team, or a company, you want to make your results inevitable. I mean, that's a big word, but that's kind of the goal. So this is a common frustration. Steve and I hear this all the time. Management doesn't get it. You know, management, they don't get it. They don't support us, all that kind of stuff. Operating divisions turn me down. There's always a huge barrier between the research and the operating divisions. We have no place to go with our new ideas. How do we bring our ideas forward? And you know, one of the most famous examples is Steve Wozniak. He went to HP, you know, one of the leading tech companies in the world, and he says they turned him down 5 times. Now, Steve just made an important point. I bet that Steve gave them a presentation that they couldn't understand. I think that's likely given who Steve Wozniak was at that point. But here's a different case. Shire, who's one of the founders of and main technical guy for Siri, which we created at SRI, which we spun the company, bought by, and Adam, who at the time was probably the top 5 AI guys in the world. I mean, he just led this revolution in personal computing. And after 18 months, he left and went to Samsung. And he formed another company, which is now part of Samsung. Now, in his case, I know he knows how to give great presentations. He's a born storyteller. He has everything you want, and he's a genius technologist. So something else happened for Adam to leave the company. Okay, quickly, some core definitions. Innovation, invention rather. Invention is when you come up with something new that you can patent, it's novel, doesn't break the law. There are 4,000 mousetrap patents. But the truth is only about a dozen of them actually are sold and make money. So in general, 3% of patents are commercialized. Think of the waste that's involved. They're not innovations. Unless somebody uses it, it's not an innovation. It's an value creation is the process by which you put all the pieces together to create innovation. So, you know, you have to develop a business model, a manufacturing plan, and all the rest of the details. And until it's successful in the marketplace and people use it and you have a sustainable business, at least for it's not an innovation. That's when it becomes an innovation. So there are 3 steps here, and these things are often companies we go into. So we've done workshops with over 500 global teams, companies you all know. And typically what we find is less than 1% of what they're working on has any value at all. Any significant value. They're working on interesting things, not an important problems. And it's not due to lack of opportunity. This is the best time for innovation probably in the history of the world. These are great people, great professionals. That's not the problem. And they generally have more resources than they know, often too many resources, which they spend inappropriately. So is this management's fault? Well, of course it's management's fault. It's management's job to create an environment where people can efficiently and effectively create new innovations. But here's the interesting thing. If you go into companies and ask them their innovation processes, generally you get blank looks. You generally get confused looks. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is just the lack of good value creation processes. That's the fundamental thing. Okay, this is what Steve also mentioned. You know, in a company, they're the senior executives, and their job is to come up with strategy. But as Steve said, are they in the new solutions? No, they're coming from the workers. So innovations come from the middle, because who else is going to do from the top? And it comes from the people in the middle who come up. And the goal is, as always, to start by identifying big, important, unmet customer needs and addressing those needs, and then hopefully with a sustainable model. And to be successful at this, you have to go up and down. You have to be connected to the marketplace and intensely interact with the marketplace to understand what to do. Now, not only do employees kind of complain about what goes on, senior executives do too. They call this the frozen middle. Somehow, the marketplace knowledge and the innovation is not getting into the core of the business, and so we'll come back to that. So I'm going to just very quickly go through three concepts that was really important. The first thing is knowing how to identify important opportunities, important customer opportunities, and not just interesting ones. That mistake doesn't matter. You need to be able to talk to each other. You need to have shared concepts for value creation. All teams come with different languages. You know, if you're a marketing person or a technical person or a finance person, a legal person, technology has its own language. The one language you must have is the language focused on the customer. It's all about the customer. So if you can't talk about the customer, your collaboration in the company is not going to be very efficient. And we'll talk about the value proposition, which we consider the most important value creation concept. People get together and share knowledge because nobody knows enough. And we're going to talk about how to do that. We call them value creation forms. So just very quick, three things. So the first thing is, what's the definition of customer value? That's an interesting question. We ask that to all the teams we work with. It's customer benefits over customer costs. It's benefits over cost. And some people, it's perceptual. Some people still like keys on their phones. Most people like a touch screen. Only the customer determines the value of your offering. Benefits and costs are perceptual, and they're only determined by our customers. What about a value proposition? As I said, this is the most idea that I know of started. The idea is to address an important unmet customer and market need with a new, compelling, and defensible approach for the offering and business model with superior benefits per cost when compared to the competition and all other alternatives. So at this point, I would like to actually run a little poll. I see I have a poll here. So let me, let me launch now that we have most of the people here. And let's see if you folks can answer this. You need to click on the box and then tell us what you think. So let's see where we are. Okay, good. We're starting to get some votes coming in. Interesting results. Thanks. Okay, got a few more. So let's see what we got here. So most of us think we're value creators. That's good. Yes, good. Oops. Okay. I'm going to end that poll and stop that. Okay, good. I just did it in the wrong order, but that's okay. We'll come back to that. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you listen to presentations like I have, this is what they typically look and sound like. I want to talk about their idea, their approach. And they'll come in things like, Steve, I'll give it to Steve. Steve, 3 hours, I have a great idea. The need is obvious. The benefits per cost are overwhelming, and there's no competition. Do you have 3 hours to listen to my presentation? What do you think? Do you have 3 hours? Probably not. Yeah. You don't want a useful presentation. And that's typically what we see. And Steve Wozniak gave a presentation like that when he went to HP. It was all about his brilliant idea, but it was disconnected from the marketplace and what was practical to be done. And here's our rule. If you can't describe your value proposition, you probably don't yet know what you're doing. So when you presentation, you have to be specific, quantitative, and memorable. Stories, sketches, charts, graphs, everything you can do to bring it to life. This is a point Steve just made. If people can't remember your idea and repeat it, it's not going to go anywhere. It's got to be memorable. So you have to use everything you can to, we call it, bring it to life. It has to be so vivid that when people hear it, they can tell their buddies and their customers, exactly why they have to use your innovation. Here's another problem. This concept of known and unknown needs. So we all know the phone. I had, and it was kind of clumsy to work with. The keys were small, your fingers are big. There were all kinds of surveys where people went out and talked to hundreds of customers, thousands of customers, and said, "What do you want? What do you need to make this a better product?" And they said, "Bigger keyboards." Well, that's because that's all they could imagine. And this is the problem we see, is that people come up with the apparent need. This is what we call apparent need, but it's not the real need. Steve Jobs realized that what was needed was a solution that would scale with infinite numbers of keys, basically. And the only way to do that was to have some kind of a display device where you could custom. He came up with the touchscreen. And as you know, he put Nokia out of business in 7 years by understanding and identifying the actual need as opposed to the apparent need. A quick test. I don't know if you were surprised when you saw a ketchup bottle upside down, but I sure was. And then you go, "Oh, it solves a real problem of pounding on the end of the ketchup bottle and getting it all over your table." So it's kind of a rule. If you're listening to a presentation and it's not somewhat surprising, probably is just, really it's not going to make it. It's not a significant innovation. Now, this isn't a huge innovation. This isn't like the iPhone, but it still isn't it. It solves a real. It's a little. Can you still see my slides?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, quickly. So we just talked quickly about 2 big ideas. And here's the third one. To learn fast and be successful in today's. You don't know enough. No matter how smart you are, you don't know enough. So you got to come together and you've got to tap into the genius of your colleagues. And we call meetings like this value creation forums. And they're a little different than probably what you experience. 3 to 6 teams will come together. The teams will give 3 to 5 minute value propositions, again, based on the NABC framework, short, concise, fundamental. We meet early because value creation is experiential. You have to learn over time. And the presenters listen to the feedback with no arguing. And they get feedback from multiple points of view. What's good, keep it, improve it, fix it, eyes of the end user and eyes of the investor. Of course, that's not the whole story. NABC, the value proposition is just the core framework. But then you have to put in place all these other pieces, you know, the white space and key insights into the solutions, a number of things. The stuff. And eventually, of course, you need to have a full business plan. Many people start with the kind of the business plan idea and then try and work backwards. Frankly, that doesn't work. You want to start out first with mental questions and then work your way forward. That's what we did with Siri. Siri started out with basic research. It wasn't until we had good working hypotheses just for the NABC value proposition did we hire this team with Adam Shire there on the right-hand side. And 2 weeks after the product was launched, Hobbs personally called us up and the company from us, which he did. Added $50 billion to Apple. Good. By the way, he didn't care where ideas came from. They could come from the middle or the outside. It didn't care. By the way, he also licensed computer mouse from us, which is kind of interesting. Now, the point I want to make is that all of this, while we were going on, started with just simple NABC value propositions, just the most fundamental things. And they continued throughout, even when the company was formed, because every task requires a focus on the customer and a value proposition. If you're interested in more of this, you can find on the hour and a half program we produced, with introduction to value creation, and how we get it at Eastern, Worcester Polytech, where I also, and other around the world. So that's a way to follow up.
Curt, we're still looking at the ketchup bottle. Maybe your slides have somehow jammed. Yeah.
You see it now?
Now we're up to.
That's terrible. That's terrible. Okay, I'm sorry, gang. Well, I hope you got the gist of that. Actually, you know, I want to share this. Well, I'm not going to. Well, okay, with that as an introduction to this, I've described 3 ideas that you can do yourself. You can continue to learn about value creation. What we discovered is very few people had those. Nobody came to eye with these skills. Generally, you don't learn them in big companies. You have to basically be proactive yourself. You can use the simple ABC value propositions yourself, and I guarantee it'll improve your presentations and your the ideas that you want to develop. And of course, you can also create a value creation where you come together every couple of weeks with your teams, share ideas. That's how we did it at SRI. We'd get together over a lunch with pizza and Coke, and we'd give our 5-minute value propositions and get feedback from folks to help refine what we're doing. Now, why do you want to do this? Well, as I just said, very few people have these skills, and those who do these skills generally have greater influence and success. And in a way, these are the only really lasting skills you're ever going to have. It's how do you develop that? Because your job as a professional is, after all, to be a value creator. It's an essential lifetime employment skill. And if you're like Wozniak or Adam Shire and get too frustrated in your company and they don't listen to you and you make the impact you want, if you have these skills, you can, of course, go somewhere else. So you're highly motivated, I think, to develop these skills. So very brief drill. And I think the one last thing I want to say is that when we started this, again, we did it from the middle. And as Steve said, that's where the ideas come. And if you think about those senior managers, as Steve said, who are spending 3% of their time on innovation, they are not going to create the innovations. They're going to come from you. And if you have the skills and the ability to not only come up with the value propositions that touch all the bases, but as Steve said, can be presented in a way that's compelling and can really stick, then you have a much better chance of being successful. Okay, with that, Steve, what do you think?
Why don't we take questions from the audience, see what thoughts have been sparked by this presentation. Anyone?
Is this a shy group?
We can't see people raising their hand, so in the meantime, Curt, could you tell us a little bit about your innovation from the middle? You've talked about the glory days when you were CEO of SRI, but even more striking to me is what you were able to do before you became a CEO, and the opposition and the obstacles, which are the kind of obstacles that constraints that many people who start down this path encounter. And how did you deal with them? How did you cope when you didn't have the power of being the CEO in the organization?
Well, I started off with a subsidiary of SRI, so it was a separate company with SRI family, and it used to be RCA Laboratories. So I was kind of a mucky muck at RCA. I was running the first, what would have been the first internet company. It was Citicorp and not in high definition television. So I had all the trappings of big success. And one day, my friend Norm Winarski walked in and said, "We've been sold to SRI after GE bought us." And I said, "Swell, is this going to be good?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so. The team thinks it will." I said, "Well, they used to give us tens of dollars to spend, but I think now they expect us to tens of millions of dollars. And I think that's really different." So I went to the new vice president. I said, "What are you going to help us do this?" He said, "No, I don't think there's any future to the technologies you're trying to pursue." So I formed a group where we got together over pizza and Coke every other week from 5 o'clock at night until 9 o'clock to learn how to become innovators. We read every book. None of them helped us. We tried everything that people recommended. None of them helped us. And we had to come up with a methodology that worked, develop innovations really fast. And we did. After 18 months of no success at all, of my getting thrown out of meetings in 10 minutes, when I used to be, someone people wanted to talk to, now nobody wants to talk to me, because the truth is I didn't know anything. I didn't have anything to offer. I wasn't customer focused, and I didn't know how to create value for anybody. But after 18 months, we started to learn, and then we started to grow really fast, and basically we were taking over the company. And so eventually, because they made me CEO of the entire company. But again, no support, no facilities to speak of, nothing, just bright people learning how to be value creators who eventually got out and created ideas that transformed the company.
So has anyone come up with a question about what is the constraint, the biggest constraint that you are facing? A number of you have said in the survey that your firm is suffering from a lack of value creation, a lack of a value creation process. What is getting in the way of that? How could you move that forward? Any thoughts?
So let's go back to the let's we have another poll here. We could do another poll. Let's try this one. Let's see if we can get a response to this. Good. Some people are responding, Steve.
Yep. So in a preliminary way, we're seeing that there's a split of opinion about whether you're frustrated by your inability to introduce new ideas. In terms of training, that does seem to be a problem. 62% not getting training in this area. Do you have regular forums? About 40% yes, 50% no. So there's certainly room for progress here. But are there any? Go ahead,
Steve. This is actually an exceptional group because, after all, these are agile aficionados, right? So these results are actually much more positive than what we typically see. It's very different from what we saw the other day with the workshop held, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but still, these are not very promising results. For example, if you're not trained to be a value creator in your company, your university didn't teach you how to do that. I'm almost guaranteed of that, right? So somehow you have to yourself. Well, that's really your option. You got to learn yourself.
Right. So 80% have voted. I still got 6 more that haven't made up their mind. One of the things you need in innovation is to make up your mind and move forward.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
By the way,
when I was talking about the value creation firms will come together, it serves a number of purposes, one of which is a place where you can learn, and not be threatened by anything. And you can, when you get enough support in a team like that, you feel better about finally giving the presentation because it really is going to be better. In fact, I would say everybody here does the following 3 things. If you focus on understanding what important problems are, if you develop shared language in your team, whether it's 3 people or 20 people, and if you get together every 2 weeks for an hour over pizza and Coke and share what you're learning and give each other feedback, I guarantee in 3 years, your performance will be transformed. I'd bet any amount of money, if you do those 3 things, you will be a different professional, and people will begin to notice that you're giving presentations that are unlike those that are typical company. Because again, I've seen thousands of those presentations, and they're all what we call big A's. They're all about the person's approach. They're not about the need. Steve has written 10 articles about how you need to start with the customer first. If you don't start with it first, you're not in the ballpark. You're not even in the ballpark. So you start there, then hopefully you'll have a key insight into a possible solution that has really superior benefits per cost when compared to the competition. But if you don't address at least those 4 questions, management won't know what to do. They won't. And most companies are like, it's a Tower of Babel. They're not telling compelling stories, Steve.
Could you say a little bit more about these value creation forums? You're using a term like that, it sounds pretty formal, but when I've heard you it's often a much more informal process, and particularly one which is collaborative and where people are not trying to pull the proposal apart and show how bad it is and find its flaws, but
Right.
rather show how you could improve it, how it could be
Yes.
improved on the next telling. And it's an iterative process, which it's
Yes.
never right the first time. And you keep on innovating and iterating and trying to make it
Yes.
better and more specific and more quantified until you finally got it. Could you say a little bit, just give the flavor of that,
Yes.
and maybe contrast it with a process where the top is trying to destroy you and the proposition, whether you
Yes.
survive.
Yeah. Well, so Steve, that was a perfect. So they are positive. Why are they positive? Every presentation starts out being terrible. I mean, I've done hundreds. I've given thousands of value propositions. They're all terrible. Every time I start a new one, terrible. Why? You don't know that much. So the spirit of value creation forums is improvement. It's about learning and it's about improvement. It's about collecting the ideas from colleagues. And there are several things that are very different from most incubation processes. The first is we have a standard frame, 4 questions, the most fundamental questions, and nobody, in all those 500 teams with all those companies around the world, Steve, there isn't one team so far that's been able to answer quantitatively, succinctly, and compellingly those 4 questions. So we start there so we have a common framework so we can talk to each other. The presentations are really short. If you tell your value proposition in less than 5 minutes, you still haven't really figured it out. So they're short. The person is quiet, so they're arguing in the meetings, and the feedback multiple points of view, because reframing is the key idea of all problem solving. You don't get it right the first time. You need your buddies to help you reframe it. So that's what's from these different points of view. What's good, keep that. What could be improved, but positively. What's the eyes of the customer? Never forget that. And what's the eyes of the investor and other people? Each one of those helps you reframe the problem way. So the meeting is based on continuous learning, which is fundamental. If you're not doing that, you have no chance of solving a hard problem. A basic, simple framework, and positive feedback from multiple points to help you reframe your value proposition, tell the story that Steve started off with in the beginning of this podcast. Very different.
Yeah, go ahead. Could you say a word about the need for partners, that you're never going to be able to pull this off alone? You're going to need colleagues, you're going to need a gang.
Yes.
How do you go about that? Who do you need in your gang? How big should your gang be?
Your gang should be small in the beginning. Your gang should be in the few essential people that you need to, again, figure out the value proposition. So people often make that mistake. This is one of Steve's major points he makes over and over and over again. Don't assemble this huge team and expect they're going to work together productively. That doesn't work. So the way at SRI, when somebody would come in with an idea, the first thing I'd ask, do you have a partner? You want to at least have a partner because this stuff is hard and you need somebody, again, to iterate back and forth with. And they need to have entry skills. So if somebody's more of a business development, or someone's a deep technical person, that's perfect, right? And then as they go along, you'll start adding a couple more people, maybe as you identify, what are the key issues here? So you'll bring in somebody who can solve that particular problem. But in the beginning, you really want to be less than 5 people because if the team, what you want is multiple perspectives, but you want the ones that are most valuable, number one. But you want everybody actively involved. And when you get above about 5 or 6 people, everybody will be involved and your team won't be that efficient. So you want to keep a small, fundamental, and focused on the key parts of the problem that you still haven't figured out. So that's how we did it.
But how does that stack up with the fact that some of these innovations are immensely complex. I mean, Siri,
Yes.
um, how, how
Yes.
could 5 people master all of the implications of something as complex as?
Well, we of course we did end up with a huge team, but what they're broken up, you kind of so you break the pieces up, and again you try and keep the teams as small as you can, with no overlap of abilities, because that that causes chaos. You have to integrate the network of these teams together. So for sure, but in the beginning. With Siri, like with most nations, generally there's only a few things that are fundamental that you have to solve. For example, with Siri, that works. So when you type in Boston restaurant, for example, I don't know, it turns out there are hundreds of Bostons and there are hundreds of Boston restaurants. But the big problem was when you say, Siri, find me a Boston restaurant, it has to figure out, where, in what country of the world. That was the hard part. And Adam Shire was the genius who figured that out. So we figured that out. The rest of it didn't make sense. So then we had to pull in a bunch of other speech technology and the natural language technology and all the rest of it. And we did that bit by bit as we solved these problems, starting with the hard ones. The teams would build up, and they'd be together to all play together. And Adam Shire, the integrative network of teams that was solving the problem.
So Mari has put in a great question in chat. She's saying, look, the strength of these innovations is going to depend on having good customer insights. If you don't have that, it's going to be a real hindrance. How do you create those customer insights?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, everything starts out with the customer. If you're wrong, you're going in the wrong direction. In fact, if you get your value question, just those 4 questions wrong, NABC, you're going in the wrong direction. And people often talk about an innovation pivoting. Pivoting means you've just made a bad mistake. A pivot is a bad thing. And now we all know we have to, change direction as we learn in the marketplace. But often people spend way too much money before they've figured out the fundamental questions and then start building up the team. So what's the problem in the beginning? People almost never figure out the real customer need in the beginning. They always jump to a solution before they've really figured out what the customer needs. So what do you have to do? Well, of course, you have to talk to customers, you have to talk to partners, you have to do everybody you can to try and figure it out. But as you gather the information, you need to constantly be reframing the question, what is the real problem? If you haven't studied reframing, it is so fundamental to this that it really is, everybody should master. Again, use the iPhone example. People, when you just ask people, said what I want was more keys. Well, that wasn't really what I was asking for because they didn't know what was possible. So you have to go back and forth between what people say, what the real problem is. The real problem in that case was just lack of functionality, and it could never be solved by keys, right? It could never be solved by keys. Then the question was, what's the key insight into the solution? So you have to go around and around and around to be able to figure out what to do.
Yeah, another example that might shed additional light on it is Spotify. About 5 years ago, they had a tremendous problem. They had 20 million songs, and people were spending all of their time searching these 20 million songs, trying to find the songs that they would like. And it was a huge problem. And
Yes.
they kept pressing Spotify, we need better search. And the management was very responsive and had a team of more than 100 people that was busy trying to upgrade search so that you could find the songs you like. And that was 100 people. A gang of 4 in one of their hackathons said, that's never going to work. The problem is not improved search. Search is a pain, no matter how you do it. People want songs. We need to be able to get songs quicker. So what if we delivered to people a playlist every week? Monday morning, they would get a playlist of 30 songs that were calibrated to fit their particular tastes at the moment.
Yeah.
And these would be songs that the people loved. And management said, that's crazy. That will never work. The team took notice of that and said, look, we already have that information. We have already tracked all of the songs that people have chosen over the previous years. We know it individual by
Yeah.
individual. We can do this. And so in a couple of months,
Yeah.
they put together this weekly playlist called Discover Weekly. And everyone found it amazing because they suddenly found every week here are 30 songs, of which about a third of them are songs that I really want to hear over and over again. So the problem wasn't at all what the customer wanted. The customer was asking for better search. They didn't realize that it would be possible to have a customized playlist every week. So asking the customer couldn't solve the problem. The customer gave you a lead that there was a frustration, but to solve the problem, you had to put it together with the technology that the people had.
Yeah. So that, by the way, that is a perfect example on many fronts, right? I mean, people do want better search, so that's not like that's a crazy. It's just not. It's not the best solution. So, for example, Steve Jobs could have solved that problem a number of different ways. By the way, he could have just had a stylus, right? But he rejected the stylus. You know, he needed a better solution to that. So that's a perfect example. You know, you build a big team and blah blah blah, and you miss one of the great alternatives, which is what your example shows. So generally, companies, again, don't have this kind of ongoing process of asking what the question is, reframing it, doing it over and over and over again, identify those kind of insights. Steve, that's a perfect example. Perfect.
And Stephanie has a great question. All this is taking time, and time is precious in an organization. How do you carve out the time to do this?
Well, okay, so it's actually, this is profoundly faster than what you're probably doing today. So that's the thing, isn't it? So imagine, I don't know what company you work in, but I bet if we did a workshop in it, we'd discover that 70% has no value for anybody. And I'll bet a lot of the solutions you come up with really are not real solutions. They have other things that should have been rejected, you know, like Steve's just example. So it's in fact about more efficiently and effectively getting solutions, because every professional here is very busy. You do not have extra time. And remember, I brought this point up because I forgot to mention one really important point about value creation forums. That's where you're spending an hour sharing and actually doing work on your current value problem, but you're collecting the genius of your colleagues. I guarantee that by collecting that genius, you're more efficient and effective worker. You couldn't pay them enough to get their advice. You know, it's always funny when I was, you know, I'm CEO of the day, and I'm doing this like everybody else. And a new employee, and I'd stand up and give my value proposition. It'd be terrible. Of course, it'd be terrible. And so this new employee would be thinking, well, who is this guy? You know, he's giving this terrible presentation and he's taking feedback from me. I'm this brand new guy. What do I know? Well, you happen to be the best AI guy in the world right now in your space. So of course, I want your input. Because I was giving presentations to other CEOs all the time. And I had to learn fast. I couldn't do that on my own. I had to tap into the collective genius of SRI. And this methodology of having a standard framework so we all spoke the same language, we had a place we could go to every 2 weeks to give a presentation, really speeds up your progress and makes the output that you produce so much. I mean, it's not even close. And by the way, now that everybody's on the internet, it's so easy to do, to get together for every week. It's what we're doing in these universities, which were impossible before. They didn't have the time. They didn't think they had the time. They actually did, but they didn't think they did. But now it's really easy. We meet with them every week, 4-week, 4-hour-a-day workshop to teach them the fundamentals of value creation. Not much at all. It doesn't take that much to understand the fundamentals. But the key is to get together every 2 weeks and give your value proposition and get that feedback. If you do those things for a number of years, I guarantee you a different professional.
Yeah. There's another dimension to this, Curt, that you sometimes talk about, and I'd like to hear more about that. And that is the idea that a value creation process is not only good for identifying unmet opportunities out there, but it is also can be used as a knife to deal with functions which are not adding great value to customers or little value to customers, and have the value creation forum, value development forums actually expose those functions which may have been around for decades in the organization, expose them to light, and ask them, well, what value for customers is your work generating? Could you tell us a little bit about your experience in that?
Well, yeah, so I already said that, most of the stuff we see, but if you get into the HR department or finance or others, it's very easy for those departments to solve a problem, but to put the burden on the staff, right? A major point of complaint. But imagine that everybody, including the CEO in my case, is standing up there every 2 weeks or every month, depending on what we were doing, and gives a 5-minute presentation on their new project, some new HR program or some new financial, metric thing. And they have to, and they get feedback from different points of view. It's a profound thing. And what had happened after a while at SRI is when people realized that a project didn't make sense, stopped. I didn't have to stop them. I had to stop a project because once you understand what important means and how it fits in and the ingredients that have to be put together, you realize if you're a good professional that if you can't meet those criteria, you don't want to spend your time on that. It doesn't make sense. So that kind of openness and transparency, as Steve suggested, is an enormous filter for things just to go away. By the way, Steve, the other key, going back to your small team point that you're always focused on, is start again with small teams to address the fundamentals first. So we don't spend a lot of money. In many companies, people will assemble, 100 teams. You just Spotify an example. They have 100 people. Well, once you get 100 people on a project, it's hard to stop it. And we see this time, these projects that go on forever, but they really make no sense because there's no transparency about does it make sense. Start with a small team, get the value proposition, repeat it iteratively, dozens and dozens of times until you properly reframed it, and only then begin to see.
There's a very interesting book that I've written about quite often called Bullshit Jobs. And it's analyzing the jobs in organizations that are adding no value to any customer, no value at all.
Right.
Surveys show that in a large, older organization, around 40% of the time is being spent on bullshit jobs, on jobs that are not adding value to customers.
Yes.
So you come back to Stephanie's question, how do you carve out time for that? Well, there's 40% of the whole staff time available. Time isn't really the problem. The problem is to focus everything on creating value to the organization. And just to finish off, Nuno has a final question. What innovation were you involved in that you are more proud of than any other? Or what innovation you think had the biggest impact in the world?
Well, we created world-changing innovations. So, but I would tell you what I'm doing now, I think is the biggest innovation I've been involved in. If we can change the way people can innovate, that is the kind of like the innovation of innovations. And my motivation is because performance today is so poor. There are so many middle managers, brilliant people that I see who are in bullshit jobs. We did a workshop for one of the top 10 companies in the world, and not one project will work any value for anybody. And our process is so transparent. We don't decide that, they decide that. And I remember that company that day, in the park we were done, completely depressed. that these brilliant people from the best schools with all the money in the world, all the equipment you can imagine, were wasting their lives. That's a real bullshit job. And so that's why I'm motivated now to teach at the universities I do and work with government agencies and other companies around the world. If we can improve innovator performance even a little bit and eliminate a lot of those bullshit jobs, not only will we be more successful as an economy and a people, but I think we'll be giving a gift to people that changes their lives and gives them a meaningful job as a one where they're just putting in time and really wasting their lives. That's what I'm doing right now is by far the most important innovation I've ever been part of.
I mean, in one sense, you're moving from increment of individual innovations to exponential innovation across the world.
That's what we're trying to do. And, that's why I'm always happy to be with Steve and his team here, because you folks are on the same mission, right? It's how do we profoundly impact the world and people? It always goes back to people, so that they can be more productive and have meaningful lives. What else could be more important than that?
On that note, I'm going to thank Curt for a brilliant presentation as usual, and thank the participants for being with us, and invite Hugo to share with us some final thoughts about some next upcoming events. Hugo?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Curt. It was a great talk as always. Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve. Oh, this was on mute, sorry. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Curt. Once again, on behalf of the World Agility Forum, thank you so much. As always, great insights, and especially about innovation, which is a subject that it's so close to the heart of Curt. And of course, the Steve Denning with his books, Radical Management, The Age of Agile. So today we ended here the Innovating from the Middle with Curt and Steve Denning. Our next step will be the World Agility Forum on September 25th and 26th. Early bird tickets end this month, so stay tuned to this. And our next webinar is Agile, the Future of HR. It will be by May 26th. You can start registrations after this session of today. Also, remember, all these webinars are part of the Experience Agile Week that will have place from the 25th of September till the 29th of September. Also, with your tickets are included master classes with Steve, Curt, among several other speakers, and also certified courses. This year, all the tickets have included a certified course or master class. So also for those, the early bird tickets will end by the end of this month. So with that, I will say goodbye and thank you so much for your participation in being here with us today. I hope to see you soon once again at our conferences and our events. And please subscribe our newsletter if you want to have more news from us. And if there is something else that we can support or help, just let us know. So saying this, once again, thank you so much.
So